Okay, so continuing on with the theme of building out templates, we're going to be talking about how to basically set up someone's program for a complete training cycle and what that might look like. So we're going to start to think about this as sort of reverse engineering the process. Obviously, we will have an end goal. An athlete might have a certain competition that they want to be preparing for, or it might be that they are trying to prepare for the CrossFit game season. And that will usually start to give us the information that we need to then start to break things down. Obviously, the closer to the competition that we're going to be looking at pre-competition phases where you're going to be practicing the sport a lot more. And then if you're away from competition, you're going to be going through something which would be a little bit more structured, which might be focused on the athlete's sort of individual needs, what they need to work on, whether that's developing their aerobic system, developing their absolute strength, or whether it's skill development. Usually those are sort of the three areas where we're looking at, or some sort of combination of that. So first off, we need to see where the athlete wants to be and where the athlete currently is. We could then make a good assessment as to what type of training they need to go through. So if they're going through something which is more pre-competition, we're looking at trying to increase the intensity over the duration of the cycle. If we're looking at something that is going to be away from competition, we may actually be looking at increasing, their sort of tolerance to volume over the training cycle. This is usually a good time to do that. We don't necessarily want to be doing that pre-competition. And then if we continue looking at it, we can then make assessments as to what type of training they need to go through. Is it going to be more skill development focused? So for their weightlifting, would they be focusing on positions, derivatives of the lifts, the gymnastic skills? Would they be trying to sort of hone in their efficiency, their technique, or would they actually be trying to practice those elements in a more sport-specific setting where they may be actually doing the full lifts, or they might be doing your traditional gymnastics within CrossFit and practicing it in a bit more of an endurance setting? Further from there, we start to piece together, okay, if we're going to be working through, say, an off-season, hypothetically, they're away from competition, they need to develop their skills. So we're not looking to push absolute intensities too much, and generally the sort of training structure, you could start to figure out what they actually need to work on as an individual, whether they need to be doing more lifting or more strength work or potentially more aerobic training. We would start to map out over the course of a week, okay, what are the main areas they need to focus on? Maybe that could look like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They're sort of coming off easier days there. Those are going to be the days where they would be able to tolerate a little bit higher impact training, higher intensity training. And then you would start to piece together the little bits and pieces that need to be put throughout the week, making sure, obviously, you're not challenging the same muscle groups and the same movement patterns 2 days in a row. You're trying to sort of have a good spread across there. And bit by bit, you would then go into things like exercise selection. And then the last thing you'd be looking at doing is probably putting in reps and sets and all that business. So I think that one of the things that I personally found within programming is that a lot of people get maybe a bit hung up on what sets and reps they're doing at what time of year. Are we trying to sort of develop, especially in strength work, are we trying to develop hypertrophy, or are we trying to develop strength and that type of stuff? Generally speaking, what actually matters is the sort of movements that you're doing and just sort of working to a challenging set of some sort, and then essentially increasing that challenge. So that idea can be highlighted through the process of reps and sets and all that business being the last thing that you would essentially put into a training program. Hopefully that creates a bit of a big picture overview of like how you would start with maybe just some very broad and general ideas, what an athlete needs to do, where are they, where do they need to be, and then eventually you're getting down into a lot more of the smaller details, and you're finishing up with sets and reps and things like that, which interestingly is like, I would say when I first started programming was where I started. I would start off with the exercises first and the sort of the sets and reps, and then it would be like, okay, what do I do for the second week? And then everything would just look pretty much like the same throughout the year. And And yeah, the more I learned about it, the more I sort of understood that that's just the that's the thing you do at the end of the week once you've reviewed everyone's training and you're like, okay, how can I move this a little bit forward? Um, what is important is obviously having that challenge, having consistency on the things that you need to work on, and then the other things sort of being on maintenance and just having a good spread of things there.
One thing I often find when I'm writing out programs is that I have to make sacrifices with either certain movements or certain movement patterns or time durations, things like that. There's always something that has to get sacrificed to make the program work well together, but also be realistic in terms of time and volume for the person to complete and things like that. So I tend to prioritize things in terms of the overall goals of a cycle, and then understand that some, like, the less important things might get sacrificed a little. So if the overarching goal of a cycle is, let's say, leg strength, and that's kind of the number one focus, and then outside of that is maybe hip power and upper body pulling strength, and below that is maybe gymnastics volume as a whole. And it might be that when I'm writing the program, there's just not enough time to fit in enough gymnastics volume based on the other priorities within the program. So I often will find it helpful to pick out those main priorities and build a program around them. And then the lesser priorities sometimes do have to take a hit to just make everything work and flow a little bit better.
John, would you say that you basically fill out a week with the priority areas you sort of have in the back of your head, like, okay, we'd like to do this and do this also, and then you're essentially just prioritizing and then filling in the little bits and pieces as you go along? Or do you fill it out sort of Monday to Sunday in sort of that structure?
I mean, I will normally take that main priority. So again, if it's leg strength, I will have my like a blank week, and I'll be okay. Monday, I want to be doing this and this for leg strength. Let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday have kind of leg strength focuses, and I build out everything I want around that. So whether it's, let's say Monday, they're doing front squat work, followed by some quad dominant assistance work, followed by some hip stability work. And then Wednesday, they're doing a bunch of single leg work and maybe some hinging for hamstrings. And then Friday, they're maybe doing back squat volume alongside, XYZ. And then from there, I'll go back through the week and start working on the other things I want to focus on in the cycle. So the main focus always starts with a completely blank slate. And I make that as perfect as possible for that focus. And then the other things will fit in and be probably less than ideal in terms of development of other things.
So I'm curious how you guys think about like progressing maybe some sort of specific thing, right? Like if we talk about I don't know, like what's a good benchmark? What has someone worked on recently with an athlete that is important? You know what? How about John's burpee row test? John, you want to talk about your favorite?
I started throwing that out there.
Is that the death by burpee one? Or the on the minute
like
one?
The 30-minute, the 30-minute.
Okay.
EMOM.
I have two different ones there. I have a death by rowing, a death by burpee, where you at 0 you start rowing. When you hit 1 minute, you get off, do 1 burpee, then get back on. At 2 minutes, you get off, do 2 burpees, and you keep going until you don't get time on the rower, and then your score is how far you've rowed.
I swear that was like
I like that one as kind of a test.
Was that like a challenge a long time ago? Something. I feel like maybe
it's possible.
I think yeah.
It's something that I've used for a long time, so it's possible that it was one like a challenge type thing a while back. But the other one would be the 30-minute EMOM. Minute 1 is 15 cow row. Minute 2 is 15 burpees. And being able to complete 30 minutes of that, which has slightly shifted in the last couple of years, to be honest, in terms of what I see people being capable of. and just pushing those reps up very slightly, not really increasing the time domain, but pushing the reps up into the kind of 16, 17, 18 cals for guys and 15 for women.
Oh, so you made it harder. Interesting.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, when people can complete it as 15 and 15 for 30 minutes, I think doing it longer doesn't really change much. So you got to make it a little bit tougher on the minute.
I mean, it is a little bit like these, it's just like, you could say you could use it as a similar benchmark to these like power tests that you find, like FTP test or 30-minute row test and all this type of stuff. And like for a CrossFit athlete, there's no real, I don't know. I do remember people doing like 60-minute rows and that type of stuff, but the utility of that for a CrossFit athlete isn't really there. And you can usually get a good reading on like how enduring someone is by that sort of thing. Like I remember, Todd, when you gave me 30 minutes on the assault bike, probably I think it might be the longest aerobic test I've ever done. It was awful.
Their stubby little legs spinning around.
I'm adapting that piece for the next season. So I'm going to be doing it as integrating echo bike as well. So 15, 15, 15 with row echo bike burpees, with the intention of, again, building reps for people. If anyone I coach is listening to this, you have 24 hours from the podcast release to text me and I won't give it to you. We'll see if anyone actually listens.
Yeah,
I coach.
That's hard.
But yeah, that's going to be coming in next year.
That sounds similar to Miko's triangle, which it's like 15.
Oh yeah, what was that?
15, 15, 15. Rest a minute, 40 minutes on row bike ski. I remember I did that. I didn't do it. I didn't complete it, but I remember I visited Andy and it was Elliot and all of the coaches from Dragon CrossFit. That's what they do for active recovery every Thursday. They just smash that out and they race it as well. I didn't race it, but I was like,
okay,
yeah. I was like, okay,
active recovery, right. Well done.
And they all walked off and they were like, yeah, I can do this 18 cals every minute. Yeah. I'm like there, like trying to get 12. Like, I haven't touched it in 6 months.
What would be fun with that is if you made it so that every round, one of the movements was a 20. And you alternate which movement it is each round. So it's like 15 row, 15 bike, 20 ski, and just cycle through like that.
Man, I just wouldn't be able to do the ski. Like, I don't know, like even just like one minute all out, I don't think I could do 20 ski calories. I'm like, oh, please help me. But okay, yeah. So let's talk about the burpee row test, right? None of the modifications of it. So say the outcome we want is someone to be able to do that 30 minutes, right? And then, I mean, John, what would you say? How important of like a key performance indicator is that? Like if someone can't do that, what does that tell you?
It's why they can't do it is the biggest indicator. Because for some people mentally, it's just not something that they like doing, and it's very hard for them to keep going on it. And if someone struggles mentally to do it, I know that the competition season is going to get tough for them because they haven't got the desire to get really uncomfortable for an extended period. And then the other things would be consistency across how long it's taking them for each section. So if their row starts off at like 40 seconds and then near the end it's down to like 55, 56 seconds to complete, looking at that pacing from the start, do they understand how to control their pace and what is sustainable for them? Is it just that they're not in good enough aerobic shape to keep moving, and they need to be realistic with pacing at the start? For things like burpees, is it just muscular fatigue in the shoulders and the core that's stopping them from keeping going? So, there's a few things I look at there as reasons why they didn't do it or didn't complete it.
with just a note on like that, the sort of mental state, mental fortitude. Like I know for me personally, I know my initial reaction is to like not like that thinking, like with okay, if you can't do this test, then you're not like tough enough. Because I mean, you look at the tests that are going to occur in the Open and quarterfinals and that type of thing. It's like, okay, you're probably going to have a long workout that might mimic that one, or the sort of sensations you're going through. But generally speaking, like you're sort of looking at this like one workout, and it sort of creates this picture of how can someone cope through that. And I know my initial liking is like that doesn't, but there is something to it, because I do know, just sort of anecdotally, like the people who are able to sort of go through those types of tests and actually like withstand that type of thing do a lot better in CrossFit. It's just it's really difficult to actually measure. It's not because you do get people who are like pretty good at CrossFit, but then they're just like you could say that they're just not tough enough for those type of tests, or they just lose concentration and that type of thing. So would you just like,
and it's not something, so it's not something that I would be able to tell by looking at just numbers. It would have to be having visually watched them complete it, to know that, because you can tell from body language, from how they're approaching burpees. Like, are they tired? Are they struggling? Or are they just like fed up and don't want to do it anymore? And you can see that difference. It's not something you can tell from the numbers necessarily.
Yeah, because I can just see someone like myself who's sort of like the shorter, enjoys squatting type athlete, just absolutely just hating every second of that experience, and just but then being able to like do exceptionally well on like a thruster, whatever, gymnastics, whatever, which is
right. But for a competitive athlete, I'd be okay with someone not liking it. And for, if you don't enjoy rowing because you're of a shorter persuasion, then, it's okay for people not to enjoy it or to struggle with it, but it's doesn't mean they can't do it and they don't see the value of doing it and therefore push themselves through it, because if people want to compete, they have to do stuff that their body is not ideally suited for.
Very true.
Yeah. I like the test too, because I think that it forces you to move at a pace that is, not fast, but is a little faster than most people can just sort of like do sustainably. And so for a competitor, like you have to be able to move at that pace of like 15 row calories and 15 burpees in whatever, like 45 to 50 seconds, without that being like a hard effort. Like that needs to be, like a sustainable, somewhat challenging pace for you, not something that's like actually hard. And so I think that that's like a pretty good way of testing that. Because if that is a hard effort, somewhere around minute 14 to 16, like one of those minutes is going to be too hard and you're just like cooked. You can't finish it. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, to sort of circle back to the templates idea. So say, okay, the outcome we want is that for someone who wants to compete, like they just have to be able to finish this test. So how do we go backwards from that? Like, what do we do to get them? John, what do you do?
Go on.
Sorry. I mean, I wanted to jump back to one thing you said there, Todd. That rep range for people in terms of being sustainable and being a good number to be able to hit per minute is very relative to the level they're at. If you were to give that to a games athlete, I would expect them to be pretty comfortable the whole time. I think men and women on that. I think there are a number of individual male athletes who you could give that as 20 and 20, and it's going to be challenging, but they can finish it. They can get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is relative to the person. And for some people,
Hepner
12
could probably
12,
do like 22.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is relevant to the person. It is. You got to make sure the reps are relevant to the person to have that. And when I plan it out, is always looking at around 45 to 50 seconds of work per minute, at least through the first 10 minutes, even if it slows a little bit after that.
So the thing is, I think Todd and I discussed this a couple of weeks ago, and it got me thinking. I was like, okay, well, I'm actually going to start doing this a bit. So I've played around with it and played around with different sort of rep schemes to see where people are at. And I think it was like a couple of people were just off the mark a little bit. So then I made it into, all right, just do it max for 45 seconds, and just sort of trying to like gain a bit of like consistency, or just like like you say, like a bit of purchase with the progression and a bit of momentum, rather than actually being like, okay, here's a target, go for it. You're not hitting it. Okay, let's lower the target down. So I think that could be really quite annoying for people, as if like they have sort of this and sort of like see it like okay, well, each week I had a calorie or something, because that's actually quite difficult to do. Although, I think it makes sense with someone who's just read a book on periodization or, a progressive overload. It's like, that isn't super easy. So yeah, I played around with getting people to do that, and then doing with like different machines as well. But I think to sort of answer the question from Todd, rather than like, you can obviously chop it up and change that 30-minute EMOM into, say, 3 10-minute EMOMs with a 5-minute break in between or something like that. And then you can start to sort of extend that work, that sort of set period. So go from 10 minutes to 12 minutes or something like that. Essentially exceed the 30 minutes, but do it in like a chopped up way, and then bring it back down. You could go that sort of traditional endurance route of building volume and then intensifying it. Or you could, I also am aware that a lot of people just don't necessarily have the time for that, especially people who are looking to be like in and out of the gym doing other stuff within, say, 90 minutes to 2 hours. So with that, I've started to actually just like get people to do a time-oriented one. And I've actually also just thrown like, for one example I had was, rather than doing like 3 10-minute EMOMs of the same EMOM, I just did that as the start EMOM and that as the end EMOM, and then in the middle I just did something completely different. So they got 2/3 of the work in, but they also got in a little bit of some other stuff. I think it was like row burpees, and then the other one was assault bike dumbbell snatch. So it was just like, okay, high turnover, similar type stuff. And then, yeah, so that was one of the ways that I've thought about progressing that sort of structure, was with sort of chopping it up, extending the work periods, but then also changing up the movement so it just doesn't get as boring as sort of every week being the same couplet. But yeah, like I definitely had a lot of noticings with sort of seeing people go through that and how that works with even athletes at different levels as well. So, okay, what rep schemes are you hitting? But yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think that the the idea that we sort of come to here is that like we have some sort of outcome that we want, whether that's Luke, like you were talking about originally with like strength stuff, or this conditioning benchmark that we want someone to be able to hit. And then it's not necessarily like, okay, we write an 8-week progression to then retest that. Right. It's like, okay, we're maybe going to work on this for 6 to 8 weeks, but the exact way that that gets worked on sort of changes. Right. But we sort of have an idea of what the benchmark is, and then we see where someone gets to over a few weeks. And then we try to vary what they're doing so that they can be successful. And that could be in the reps and sets in like some sort of strength progression, or that could be like you were just saying, Luke, some clever manipulation of the EMOM structure, not just trying to progressive overload it, but like vary it slightly so that they can be successful, and then see if they can do a slightly harder version. And then if they can't, then back off again, vary it a little bit. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that that's how I think about like progressing through a template and like reverse engineering the outcome that I want, rather than just like, here's the 8-week linear progression that's going to get them. Right.